Hello everybody, it's Tommy and welcome back to another video for the Disney Save. Today, this is the master renovation video for Forgotten Hollow. This is basically all of the in-betweens as I've been working on renovating Forgotten Hollow for builds that are staying or characters that are staying in this world, but basically just needed some updating, especially with some of the newer packs that we've gotten. I'd say over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, but Forgotten Hollow was my third world, I believe, that I ever did. So it was a little bit older now, and specifically I came here because I'm not doing a full renovation on all of my older worlds. My second world ever that I did was Evergreen Harbor, and I'm not touching that one, at least for right now. I kind of am thinking about it in the back of my head. But for right now, some of the stuff in this world was getting transitioned over to Ravenwood. Specifically, Bald Mountain was the big project. That household is getting separated out. There were a lot of characters from different films living together. I'm trying to take all of that out of the Disney Save. And Bald Mountain was physically Horn King's castle, and I just called it Bald Mountain, and it had some little splashes of Chernobog in the designs and in the decor. So Chernobog is staying here in Forgotten Hollow. The Horn King castle is physically being moved to Ravenwood, and it's also getting some updates when it goes to Ravenwood to remove all of the Chernobog stuff, the Hercules stuff, and make it a little bit more of a functional, accurate version of that castle. All of that is later stuff, however. Today, I'm going to be showing off the stuff that you guys missed. So this is going to include in today's video Haunted Mansion. That is the original Haunted Mansion residential. It's a haunted house residential, and it's the version from Disneyland. There is a nightclub across the street that's definitely going to need some explaining. It is both the Haunted Mansion from Disney World and a little bit of a shout out to House of Villains, which was a TV show that used to run on Disney Channel back when I was younger. There are some character revamps in today's video, all of the characters that live here at the Haunted Mansion, as well as some Haunted Mansion townies. And then at the very end, I believe, Chernobog got some updates from Enchanted by Nature. So there will be multiple characters today. I'm going to be putting some little text across the screen so you guys know what I'm working on, just in case I don't immediately sort of talk about it, because as you can see, this is a very, very long video today. And I love doing long videos. It gives me a chance to really chat and talk about all sorts of stuff, some tea, some Sims community things, and some of the stuff going on with updates and my feelings, and also Enchanted by Nature, which I'm very excited about, but we'll get into all of that later. First and foremost, starting out with the Haunted Mansion Haunted House Residential. Unfortunately, you're going to hear me say this multiple times throughout the video today. I did not think that this building was going to need as much work as it ended up getting. The exterior really didn't change all that much, and I remember back when I did this build, I spent a really, really long time trying to make this exterior as accurate as possible, because whenever you do ride recreations, there's always a little bit of an issue where it's hard to get a full image of the actual thing that you're working on, and then you tend to use, or at least I tend to use, ride miniatures, sculptures, Christmas ornaments, little things that Disney has put out over time that show what they are saying the building basically looks like, which is all great, but there tends to be little inconsistencies even between the models and things over time that Disney is putting out. And the reason that it's so hard to just physically look at the building and replicate it is because it's attached to the back lot of Disney and all of those hidden buildings that you don't even realize that you're inside of when you're in the ride. So you can only see the buildings or the rides usually from so many angles, because the entire premise of the park is that they are literally obstructing your view from being able to see certain angles of this building or the back end of the building, especially the back side, so that you feel fully immersed in the experience of the ride, which is all great, but it just makes a lot of work when it comes to trying to make something that's very accurate. And so when I made it originally, I did a lot of guesswork, I did a lot of research, and I did a lot of just changing little things here and there and accumulating all of those different models into a version that I felt confident in. And then the second problem kind of presents itself, which is, how do I fit pieces of the ride inside this while keeping it a functional residential and knowing that the ride itself in Disney is not physically in this building. So they're working with a lot more space than I am. Now, I wasn't going for a one-for-one ride recreation from beginning to end. That was never the intention. I always knew it was going to be a residential of sorts. So that kind of does work itself out by doing little nods and little shout outs to the ride instead of trying to do a full canon walkthrough, which would be a ton of work. But basically, I got here, I started to have a look at it. I knew that I was going to, first and foremost, as I have been doing with all of my other worlds, I am getting much, much better at making sure that the surrounding landscape landscaping, the trees, the plants all match, and I'm using plants from this world. So you will see me frequently throughout the video filtering all of the plants to make sure that I'm basically only using the ones that the Sims team built the world with. And that is going to be like kind of the exclusive rule going forward, with a few exceptions here and there when it comes to like specific foliage that maybe whatever I'm building calls for. But for the most part, I really, really want the foliage to be the same on the lots and in the surrounding area. I think it's going to help everything look a lot more cohesive. And then when you look at the world map overview, even if the architecture changes between builds and it's a little bit like slightly different, it still looks all very cohesive, which is the goal at the end of the day. Now, the exterior was really not the issue. I did update some of the lighting. I was happy with the windows and things. It is using a lot of Strangerville, but again, this building is, I believe, in the New Orleans section or the New Orleans Square area of Disneyland. And so it's based on that regionally. And so I have a lot of knowledge about like the pieces that I've already used because of Princess and the Frog builds just coming out of Willow Creek. So it's not a surprise to me that I leaned into Strangerville yet again because I used a ton of that back when I was doing Princess and the Frog. I did update some of the awnings, the columns, the spandrels and things. The green color is really tough because the green options that we have from Strangerville, like the specific shade of green that they chose with that pack, is more of like a pastel green, and I'm looking for more of a true emerald green, and it's not exactly correct, but it is the closest we have aesthetically, so I kind of make an exception for it. And then adding some plants and adding some things, a little bit of life and death, changing the roof tiling. I was pretty happy with the exterior, and I thought this was going to be a really quick project. I was like, perfect. I don't really think the interior is going to need that much work. Let's go inside, take a quick look, and then I'll do, you know, probably some updating with life and death, and that'll be good. So I went inside, I start looking around, and I'm like, okay, it's not as nice as I thought it was. There's something about the interior of this build that I'm not happy with, and I'm trying to tell myself that it's because so much of the interior is supposed to be in disarray, covered in cobwebs and dust, and in sort of like a bad state, and I spent a lot of time adding all of that stuff to the build, so interiorly it looks maybe a little bit messy, and I remember that being intentional at the time, which is like, it's a good thing. It's what I wanted when I built this originally. So then I was trying to redecorate around the cobwebs and the cracks and all of the garbage basically, and I found it really difficult. So I started just like clearing a couple of rooms. I'm like, yeah, I don't like the bathrooms. I don't like some of the carpets that I've used. Let's go ahead and update some of the wallpapers with life and death. So then basically every room that I wanted to touch a little bit, I cleared all of the cobwebs, the cracks, all of that like messy stuff out of the room just so that I could look at it and make sure that I was decorating the way that I would have wanted. And then I thought I'll go back in and add that stuff later. So then I did one bathroom and I did it with the life and death stuff, and I really loved it. And I replaced the wallpaper and I did some new columns, and I was like, yes, this feels just right. And then I went over and did a different bathroom, and then I'm like, yeah, I don't really know why I put this room here. This seems like a little bit of an odd choice for where I put this room. Let's clear it and make something else. And then I went to the kitchen and I kind of didn't like the kitchen. And then I went to the ballroom and I was like, yeah, we could update this a little bit. And it ended up turning into a full renovation. Every single room gone over, touched, redecorated, heavy on life and death, heavy on paranormal stuff, heavy on the sanctuary kit, which I absolutely love. It gives Clue vibes, and I keep saying that, but I think it pairs so well with like the jewel tones and the specific color palette that they chose for life and death. It's kind of like a pairing kit, in my opinion. A lot of the wallpapers and the carpets for life and death have little skulls or ghost motifs hidden in the furniture. And so it's a really nice way to put something that looks expensive and something that looks like it is befitting of a mansion into the build, but have that nod of the more gothic, dark academia elements that I am looking for at the end of the day in here. Also keeping in mind that we are in the vampires world. The vampires pack needs to be kind of prevalent in all of the builds here just to keep everything somewhat cohesive and not have the haunted mansion stuff look too far from the vampires builds, because basically what I ended up doing is Vampirina's house is a vampire house. The haunted mansion is a ghost house. The other haunted mansion is ghost leaning, but again, I mixed in vampires to kind of like make everything flow very nicely. And then at the top of the hill is Chernobog's home. He is also a vampire, but he's going to lead more in like the medieval vampire and less in the Victorian vampire direction. So keeping vampires usage in between all of the builds, keeping the curtains, some of the wallpapers, especially like the bright purple wallpapers and those really, really intense wallpapers that come with the Vampires pack. They really do scream Haunted Mansion anyway, and I believe I used a lot of that originally when I did this build the first time around, so I did want to keep a lot of that. And as you can see from the length alone of this video, it just ended up being a really big project. I spent multiple days here renovating. I didn't want to necessarily like redo the whole thing. There are definitely some elements that I kept. There are, for the most part, going to be like the same exact rooms. But other than that, I removed basically everything and just redecorated, which is not by any means as big of a project as doing the full exterior and interior from the inside out. That's definitely like a whole different project. But at the end of the day, it ends up feeling like a brand new build. And I don't know if I included the footage of this today, but at the end, I do go back in and re-add in the cobwebs and the dirt and some of the grime, but I didn't do it to the same level as what I did before. And I'm not sure that everyone's going to agree with that choice, but I felt like when I was in here, it was like chaotically messy just from the grime and the dust. And I really didn't like how it looked. This is supposed to be a mansion at the end of the day. And I know that this mansion is abandoned and all of the Sims that live here are ghosts. And they're probably not like going around cleaning up. And when you ride the ride, there is that element of like overgrowth and dirt and grime, but it just felt like I maybe did it a little bit too much in here. And it took away from like the mansion aesthetic. So I did put some of it back in, but it's not going to be to the same level as before. I've been play testing as of me doing today's audio. And the first place I started with was this build, because this is a haunted house residential. So they work a little bit differently, obviously, than a traditional residential. But in the Disney save, I have been sort of avoiding some kind of like big issue. And that is Guidry and Temperance. These are two Sims that specifically spawn in haunted house residentials. Guidry is kind of like your flirty ghost guide. He is a ghost Sim, and he appears to basically help your Sim through the process of living in a haunted house. And then Temperance is supposed to be basically a bad spirit that shows up and messes with you and makes it really chaotic and really difficult to live in the house. And one of the things that I do in the Disney save is I like to try to replace these characters with canon Disney characters that really, really make sense for like fitting that role. And this is sometimes very obvious, and then other times this is really challenging. And I have to say, I'm probably in the minority here, that I am one of the people in the Sims community that would rather that the Sims team does not add like specific canon lore in terms of NPCs to The Sims 4. And I guess what I mean specifically is like whenever they add in a character that's named, like Bonehilda, Guidry, the Crumple Bottoms, those become really difficult for me to find like a Disney character, because there's all sorts of like challenges when it comes to like specifically picking out the character. First of all, 9 times out of 10, if you're going to replace that person, you have to do it very carefully. There's a lot of steps that I do behind the scenes to make them look like someone else, possibly rename them, but there's a lot of stuff you also can't touch, and it depends on the role and what it is. There's all different rules for all the different roles. For some of them, they're highly customizable. They can basically be anybody, and they can be like living Sims, like Sims that you play with actively in a household. Some of them you can't touch or activate at all, or the game will replace it with a copy of that same Sim. And then some of them are like in an in-between state where you can edit them and touch them and physically make them look different, but you can't change too many things about them. So Guidry and Temperance are that in the middle, as far as I can tell from what I've been playing. They can be edited and they will stick, but you can't change a lot about them. They have to remain the gender that they are. You can't touch their skills. You can't touch the way in which they died. Basically, you're just copy pasting a physical appearance of a different Sim over the top of the two. And then I had to pick a Disney character that makes sense for, because the other problem that kind of comes up is that any Sim in the Disney save that lives in a haunted house residential, and this hasn't come up very often other than this one. The only other one right now in the save file might be Jack Skellington's home. But just keeping that in mind, who would make a good replacement for Guidry amongst Disney characters that is okay with popping up inside multiple haunted houses? Like if you're playing in this haunted house, it could be insert blank character. But if you're also playing with Jack Skellington, who would make sense over there that it doesn't feel too odd for that character to like appear in both universes, basically, if that makes makes sense. And I've been avoiding this for a really long time. Back when paranormal was introduced and they put these new NPC roles in, I kind of am rolling my eyes in the background because this is a lot of work for me. This is a little bit of like an added detail that I just don't really have the bandwidth at the time to figure out what I'm gonna do. And ultimately, I had not made the decision about what I would pick until basically yesterday. But I started doing some research on the Haunted Mansion, and I am a little bit of like a weird Haunted Mansion, I won't say expert, because some people are crazy about the information regarding this ride, but I have done so much research over the years between this build, between the other one, and now doing even more, trying to look at some of the characters, because I thought to myself that one of the things I typically do, and I haven't done like a ton of this, but this is kind of the plan. If I need to fill an NPC role in the Disney save, and there isn't a character that fits the role for whatever given reason, like you can't really think of a Disney character that will specifically go there, I think that my idea is to use Barbies, because Barbie is a character that exists inside of Disney because of Toy Story, that has been shown in Toy Story to have like basically hundreds or thousands of, and they all treat each other like sisters. It's very like, I call it Nurse Joy and Jenny from Pokemon, like how there's tons of them and every town you go into there is another one and they're all sisters. It's kind of giving that vibe, and I feel like that's a really good solution when it comes to filling all the little random ones that maybe I just can't find like 5 firefighters and I can't find 8 bartenders. Like there will be some that aren't Barbie, but if I can't find as many as the game kind of needs by the end, then Barbie is a really good filler. Now, before anybody gets too worried, I didn't like Barbie for this role because I felt like it was funky for Barbie to pop up in the Haunted Mansion and be that character. I was specifically picturing that she would pop up as like a Guidry that is Barbie-like, and I didn't like that idea very much at all, and I didn't really like Temperance as Barbie either. So I decided it made a lot more sense to possibly pull from some more Haunted Mansion lore and do some characters that I did not do originally when I made the Haunted Mansion, because who currently lives here is Edward Gracie, Constance Hatchaway, the Hatchbox Ghost, and Madame Leota, and that's it. The hitchhiking ghosts are in the save file, but they're townies, and I didn't do basically anybody else. There are other characters. I would say I picked the most famous ones and I put them in here, but I didn't want to do like a full household of 8 ghosts. It was just a lot at the time. And I'm kind of glad now in retrospect that I didn't, because I started doing research on some of the other ghosts and the other famous characters from the Haunted Mansion, and I decided that a couple of them were perfect picks for the different roles. So number 1, Guidry is going to be the ghost host. I don't know why this never occurred to me before. This is an obvious choice. Now, before anybody gets mad, there is sometimes like one of the canon pieces of Haunted Mansion lore, or I would say like one of the theories, is that Edward Gracie is the ghost host. And I just want to say, obviously, I'm ignoring that a little bit. I don't necessarily think that that's true for many reasons, but if you think that it's true, that's okay. I'm just saying that I am obviously going to make them 2 different people. There is a portrait from the Haunted Mansion that is supposed to be, or at least what the community calls, the ghost host. One of the reasons that this is like really difficult to research is because Disney does not really recognize a lot of the, I guess, community canon of the Haunted Mansion. They have started to more in recent years, but it's just due to like popularity. When the ride first came out, a lot of these characters and a lot of these portraits, I don't want to say they're like meaningless, because they're not. Like obviously whoever created them put a lot of thought and effort into them and like designed these really interesting characters, but I don't think that they intended that so many people would latch on to how they looked and want to know more about them and create this whole like lore and community and thing around it. So basically what ended up happening is a lot of the Disney people got together and started to create their own lore regarding the Haunted Mansion, and then Disney has picked up some of that over time and taken some of it under their wing, and some of it they just haven't. So all that to say that Edward Gracie is sometimes known as the ghost host. The ghost host is that voice you hear in the room before you go onto the ride, but there's also a portrait on the ride that is, according to the community, the ghost host, and it is separate from Edward Gracie's portrait. So I am making that person the ghost host, that guy in the portrait. He's kind of like an old, creepy looking man, into the ghost host. And that's gonna be a little funny because as far as I'm aware, Guidry is kind of like a little flirty ghost. And to have the ghost host pop in and be like a little flirty, I think it adds something really funny to the Disney save. So I'm excited about that choice. I think it makes makes so much sense, of course, that the character in The Sims 4 that guides you through the experience of living in a haunted mansion would become the ghost host, of course. The second character, Temperance, was a little bit more difficult to place, but once I knew I was going the direction of picking a haunted mansion character, I knew it was only a matter of time before I decided which one. So I went through a lot of other portraits and a lot of other characters. One of the issues that comes up is that you can't really change the genders for a lot of these NPC roles, so Temperance has to be a woman. So I was looking at female portraits, women, anybody depicted on the ride that I hadn't already used. And there were a couple that came up, but the one that I ultimately decided on is called April December. So April December is a part of the Sinister 11. The Sinister 11 are the 11 portraits that are specifically on the Disney World ride and the Tokyo ride. And I don't believe the Sinister 11 technically canonically appear on the Disneyland version of the ride. However, some of the Sinister 11 are also shared with the Disneyland version. So not all 11 appear there, but there are some. And one of those ones was April December. She was at certain points in time, because they move these portraits around. Some of them disappear for certain lengths of time. Sometimes they disappear and come back. Sometimes they are traded between parks, believe it or not. At least that's what Disney Wiki was saying, basically. April December is one of the Sinister 11 who is both female and appears on the Disneyland version and the Disney World and Tokyo version. So I liked her. She's kind of like a younger looking woman. The other choice was possibly, there is one that is a witch that turns into some kind of a cat in her portrait. And I know some of you immediately are going to be like, well, yeah, that's the better choice because she is a witch. And I believe Temperance is also supposed to be a spellcaster. But I didn't pick her because her portrait is not used on all of the rides. She's not as popular or prominent of a character. And my Haunted Mansion experts probably know April December, but they might not know the other one that I'm referencing for the fact alone that I don't even know her name. She's something witch something. Her Disney Wiki was significantly shorter. There was a ton more information, and it just seemed like April December was a little bit more canon. So ultimately, I just wanted to pick somebody that I felt like was maybe a little bit more recognizable and was used in multiple parks so that people who are only familiar with one version or the other could sort of experience it and know who that person may be. It gives me a better chance. I think that in general, when the sim pops up and it's not Temperance and it looks kind of like somebody else, it's going to be a little bit shocking for some people who don't like watch my longer videos and my explanations and things like that, or you're not actively a part of the community so you don't know, and that's kind of a cool surprise at the end of the day. But at the same time, one of my ultimate goals with the Disney save is to try to keep the characters a little bit limited to characters that are the most recognizable, so I don't have a lot of randoms running around. And when it comes to adding these NPC roles, they tend to be characters that are a little bit more on the outskirts of knowledge, just because I can't usually make them really recognizable characters, because what that does is deactivates the household. Like, you essentially can never play with the ghost host and you can never play with April December, because if you touch them, add them to the household, modify them in any significant way, it's going to make a clone of that NPC role and reactivate it in its original form. For example, over in Hemford on Bagley, I did use Barbie to replace both of the Crumple Bottoms and the Mayor. Those are all roles that you can't add them to your household, you can't touch them, and specifically with the Crumple Bottoms, if you go to like your household manager inventory, you won't see the Crumple Bottoms in there because they are very, very specific, non-editable roles. And if you mess with it even a little bit by creating a romance, by adding them to your household, it can sometimes create issues, and then the game will just replace that role with a clone. And so I'm trying to avoid that by picking characters first and foremost that you don't really want to play with anyway. Like, I don't think too many people are going to be upset about not playing with the ghost host. And if you don't care at the end of the day, then you don't care. That's fine. You can do whatever you want. You can add whoever you want to your household. You can mess with all of my NPC roles that I'm putting in. It doesn't matter to me what you personally choose to do. But if you do it, just know that the game will change it. And I intend for it to be a different way, because I'm trying to like fully immerse everybody into the Disney save, replace those characters so that everybody is Disney. You're living in this big Disney once upon a time storybook universe type thing. Ultimately, really happy with those decisions. I love it. I don't think you'll probably, if you're like a patron, get to see what some of that looks like. It's not going to be included in the video today. All I basically do is create a sim that I want my NPC to look like. When I think about Gidry, I'll just go into Create a Sim and I will make a sim that looks like the ghost host. And then I take that sim, I bring it into the game, and I use MCC to copy and paste the features of that sim onto Gidry. And for the most part, this is going to work. You do sometimes still have to enter casts with Gidry or with the NPC role in a very specific way that I'm not going to bother explaining to any of you because it's a little bit boring, to get it to stick and to get everything to copy over correctly and just double check. And then whenever I do this, I usually play the game for a couple of days just to make sure that the game is not replacing the role, that everything is good, that we have a full, good, clean transition of the character, because sometimes it doesn't work. But for the most part, that's been really, really successful for me. I do upload those sims to my gallery. However, I do put like kind of the caveat of being that if you download that off of the gallery and you pop it into your game, I'm not saying that that's going to replace the correct role that I have done it over the top of. I don't know how that would work. Like if you do it from the gallery, I have no idea, but just for the likeness and just so that people can have the characters if they want to as additional or whatever you guys want it for, it is there on the gallery. Like I think my Barbie crumple bottoms are on the gallery, and if you put them in game, I have no idea what will happen, to be fair. I did Oogie Boogie as one of the werewolves characters. There's a big bad in the werewolves pack. I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head, but I replaced him with Oogie Boogie. Over in Henford on Bagley, I believe there is also not a hermit, but there's some kind of like a spellcaster NPC role that lives in the middle of nowhere that you can kind of summon from a very specific house. I don't remember what the role is called. I'm so sorry, guys. It's been a little bit since I've done that one, but I replaced her with the witch from Brave. There is a bartender, specifically like a very specific pub owner role that is also a part of Henford on Bagley, and I replaced that role with the huntsman from Snow White. So I do this and I try, and I'm trying to work out like who all the characters are going to be. I have a spreadsheet. I have all this information on like how to do this properly, and I'm kind of like picking away at it over time as we come to different worlds and different roles, and some of them I do occasionally skip. I am thinking about Ravenwood as we creep into the Ravenwood process, and there are a couple of NPC roles over there that I need to start thinking about, like who are going to take over those characters. Those are again really, really tricky choices, to be honest. I'm here for any suggestions. Please leave them down below for my Ravenwood specifically characters. My only rules are it has to be kind of like a outskirts, not as popular usually Disney character, because you typically can't play with this character, so I like them to not be like the main character from a given story. The other thing is if that character is going to pop up with a lot of the other things in the game, like if you're going to see them all the time, I like it to try to make sense to the best of the world's ability. Like again, Barbie doesn't really fit the vibe of Ravenwood. I don't think Barbie is like a great choice for that world, whereas maybe for Del Sol Valley with like random additional actors that you need for the save, maybe Barbie would work. For those of you that are going to be wondering about the Haunted Mansion characters, they are all ghosts. They always have been, but obviously with Life and Death, we got an expansion on Ghost Sims, and we also got like skill trees and different powers and things that ghosts can specifically have. They're now a more functional occult with a lot more detail, and I have been getting asked about what is happening to my old ghosts that already existed before this change was made, but I have already gone into the version that's available for download and updated them at least a little bit. Now with this revamp specifically of Forgotten Hollow, I did make sure to just double check their skill trees, the ghost color that they are, and make sure that they feel a little bit more fleshed out. So they have been updated for the Life and Death stuff. I was very excited when the cast came out for Life and Death to come into cast and update them all a little bit. It felt like that some of the pieces that came with it were just made for me. And I know I've said that before, and it's not true. Like, I'm just saying this as a little bit of a joke, obviously. But some of the pieces specifically that came with the pack were so spot on for things that I was missing, quite frankly, the first time I made these characters. Specifically, the Hatbox Ghost, really, really cool. And I'm going to be featuring this a little bit in the Create a Sim momentarily here, so you guys will start to see some of this come to fruition. But there is one particular item where you can see the like skeletal ghost chest inside of the costume, and that is so specifically like how the Hatbox Ghost is depicted on the ride. So to be able to see like more of his skeletal form, because he has like these skeleton hands and you can see through him and you can see some of like his skeleton inside of the ghost form, to be able to finally put that in accurately was huge, and to be able to replace some of the clothing between all of the characters with clothing that I feel is maybe a little bit more appropriate to the time period, given that I had to use vampires the first time around. And I'm not saying that vampires isn't accurate either, but it's clear to me that these clothes are made more specifically, obviously, with ghosts in mind, and they're a little bit like ratty, tattered. Some of them are missing the leg pieces, and they worked perfectly along with the hair to just give these guys a refresh that they desperately needed. I love Constance. I have loved her since I made her. I was obsessed with her when I first did her. There's just something about her. I think she's so lovely. She's so beautiful. I love her entire backstory. One of the things that I really brought to the save that I wanted is the idea that obviously she is so like beautiful, and all these men are pining after her, and she marries a lot because she's not really marrying for love. She's marrying for money. She tends to marry people, and then suddenly her husbands will go missing, they'll disappear, something tragic will happen to them, and she gets to remarry. And she actually, I believe, has death type, death by a broken heart. And in my headcanon, I imagined that she lived kind of a longer life and remarried and lived in all these mansions and all this lavishness, but she dies and she has like a broken heart because she never like really found that one true love. Or she realizes at the end of living all of these lives that she kind of wasted her time, because at the end of the day, everybody dies and all she did was die rich. And there's so many different directions that you can take this. I think that with Constance specifically, she is supposed to have possibly died on her wedding night, which is why she is in a wedding dress, according to like official Haunted Mansion lore. So you can do absolutely whatever you want with it. One of the things that I implement with my ghost sims is whatever costume or outfit they are wearing as their primary everyday wear, that is the clothing that they're going to wear for everything. And I don't do this out of laziness. It is obviously a lot easier for me to implement something like this, but I feel like it makes sense that ghosts are like sort of permanently trapped in that one form. So even when they're swimming, even when they show up at a party, even when it's super hot out, they're only ever going to wear the one clothing outfit that they essentially died in. And I love that. I think that it really makes something interesting for the ghost sims. Now, specifically again with Constance, there was 2 years ago now, I think, or possibly this past Halloween, they had a Constance Hatchaway character performer come out for one of the Halloween events at Disneyland. And I was so excited when I saw this, because when I originally made these characters, I am using basically like portraits, and some Disney released like artwork when it comes to toys, things like that. But I didn't have character performers, most definitely, the first time that I created them. So when I saw that they had a Constance out at Disneyland, I saved all of those videos, all the TikToks that I found, because I knew when I came back to this household, I would go ahead and update her to make her match that character performer a little bit more. And I am happy to say, pleasantly surprisingly, I did a pretty good job the first time around. She actually looks a lot already like the character performer. I did tweak her facial structure just a little bit, and I changed her dress, because the dress that Disney put her in was a little bit different than what I would have imagined, but I loved it. I thought that it was great. I wanted to definitely use it. I couldn't give her the proper like veil, and I couldn't give her some of the details as far as like jewelry go. It was very specific. And even with Vampires in Life and Death, we are a little bit limited in terms of like the clothing style from this era of history. But I love her. I think that she turned out great. Edward Gracie got a bit of an update definitely from Life and Death. He got a new hair. Madame Leota also received quite a bit of changes. She had a newer portrait come out that has become like canon, since again I made these guys originally, and I didn't have it as reference the first time going in. So it was nice to see, because the portrait was actually a version of Madame Leota that existed before she died. So I think when I originally made her, I only ever had her head floating in the little glass jar as reference, and I knew the actress that had played her, and so I kind of like looked at her for reference and things like that. But I was able to find a portrait that was done of what Madame Leota looked like before she died, and some of the clothing that she wears specifically, because obviously with the floating head, I didn't really know what outfit she would be in. So I put her in some kind of like spellcaster's dress that I was never really happy with, but now I know what she would wear. So I put her in something a little bit more accurate. I believe again it was from Life and Death. She has very heavy makeup, and the reason being because I really wanted it to show through on the ghost form. And one of the cooler things that they added more recently to The Sims is that you can now switch the ghost form on and off, so you can see what they look like when you're making them, because when you add that ghost shading over the top of this in, it really does become difficult to see specifically like what they look like, and it takes some of their little details and features away. So that's a really nice thing, especially for a creator like me. Edward Gracie has death by poison. Madame Leota has death by spellcaster overload. And the Hatbox Ghost, I don't remember. He might have death from old age because he's like a skeleton. I don't know. I don't think he got as much lore as some of the other characters. And then we have the hitchhiking ghosts. These guys are supposed to be like 3 specific ghosts that you see, I think towards the end of the Haunted Mansion ride. They kind of have their thumbs all out like they're going hitchhiking. And I believe some of the lore behind them is that they are escaped from some sort of prison or some sort of hospital. And they all look like, I don't know, maybe different prisons, different hospitals. Like one of them is wearing a hospital gown, one of them is wearing an actual like suit and tie. It's a little bit of a toss-up. Maybe they just all happen to be hitchhiking. Maybe they were not from the same location and they all kind of accumulated and decided to go hitchhiking together. I don't know. But they got some updates as well, some new hair. I took a look at all of their traits and everything just to double check. I believe 2 of them have death by drowning, and I thought that that was like specifically a reference to trying to leave whatever prison or whatever hospital they were in. If you imagine that that prison was somewhere in the middle of nowhere or surrounded by water, and so when they tried to leave, they drowned possibly. And then one of them also might be death by old age, that skeleton looking one yet again. These guys are nasty, they're evil, they are unpleasant to look at. I don't love them, I don't hate them. I wouldn't have included them, to be so honest with you, if not for the push from my community and the love for the Haunted Mansion, and people just wanted so many more characters. And back in the day when I did the Disney save, I wasn't worried about character count, so I would basically do whatever anybody really wanted for the most part. I did put my foot down with a couple of things, but if a lot of people wanted something, I would bring it to the Disney save, and I can't unfortunately really do that anymore, not to the level that I used to do. But now that they're here, I'm glad that they exist. Also, just a little bit of a mention, there is the Gravekeeper. He is also like a bigger, more prominent character from the Haunted Mansion, and he has a dog named Bones, and he is also in the Disney save as a townie. I didn't really touch him this time around. I did take him into cast just to double check and see if there was anything from the Life and Death pack that made sense to update him with, but he really, really looks good the way that he is, and I was happy with the choices, and I just liked everything how it was. So he's not included in the video because he didn't receive any updates. I believe his name is Silas, possibly, and he is the Haunted Mansion keeper. He takes care of like the exterior, he takes care of the plants, and now you guys know there is a lot next door that is the Haunted Mansion cemetery slash garden, so he's kind of like the caretaker of that. One of my things that I'm going to try to implement that I haven't done yet, but my goal is that every one of the cemeteries in the game has a Gravekeeper role, like an NPC role that will spawn in. So I would like to try to take Silas and put him in as that role. I am a little worried about how this is going to work because he has a dog, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that, essentially. I think he will also end up being the cemetery caretaker for all cemeteries in the Disney save, which is fine because that's kind of what he is anyway, so I guess it makes sense for it to be him versus anybody else, but it is just something to keep in mind. If I can't get it to work because of the dog thing, I don't know who else I'm going to pick, because again, I don't think Barbie's gonna cut it. With a lot of these NPC role replacements, if I can't come up with something that immediately makes sense and it's not like pressing for the world, then I tend to just skip it for now, because it's something that I do plan to touch at the very end of the save file and like fully fix and fully do for all roles, and it's going to take a lot of time. So sometimes it's like if I can't think of anything, I have so much more time to continue thinking about it, or maybe a new character will pop up, or I don't know, an idea will come to me later down the line, and so I just wait on it. And I'm glad that I do that because again, I didn't know who to put in for the Haunted Mansion residentials, and now I feel like I made a really, really good choice. Moving on to our other large build of today's video. This was formerly called House of Villains, and this was a little bit of a combination idea. I am a lover of the Haunted Mansion, but I specifically am a Disney World goer. So when people asked me to bring the Haunted Mansion to the Disney save, my first idea and like what came into my head is to do the Disney World version, because that's the only one that I know. And that's not what people wanted, obviously, because the Haunted Mansion is more iconically from Disneyland, and that's the one that most people probably think of when they think about it. So I when I realized that, was a little bit disappointed. I wanted to do this building. I think it's really interesting. It is so different than the building in Disneyland. They are so aesthetically different from one another, and I really wanted to have both. And I felt like it would be such a miss to not do both. So my idea was to create the outside of this as the Haunted Mansion from Disney World, but the interior would be a villains themed nightclub called House of Villains. And House of Villains is a TV show that used to run on Disney Channel. It was kind of a spin-off of House of Mouse as far as I'm aware, where the characters obviously and the stories that they showed were a little bit more leaning into the villains aspect of Disney. And this world, Forgotten Hollow, was originally very heavily Disney villains themed, and a lot of Disney villains lived here. So having House of Villains be here made so much sense. But I am taking the villains aspect out of this world. This world is now vampires themed with a splash of ghosts. And so this entire mansion, I felt like needed to be returned to some kind of state that was a little bit more reminiscent of the Haunted Mansion itself, and have the villains theming taken out of here. So this whole build is going to give very much Clue. It's going to give Haunted Mansion, but I did want it to look a little bit different than the other Haunted Mansion. I wanted it to lean more heavily into the jewel tones, the brighter colors, not as chaotically disorderly, not as messy, not as abandoned. This is actively being used as a nightclub, but it is essentially someone's house at the same time, which I really, really liked the idea of. I don't have any other nightclubs like that in the Disney save. I have a lot of just like commercial lot nightclubs, but none that are essentially somebody's house. Like imagine you get invited to this big lavish party at a mansion, and that is the nightclub and the party scene for the night. I also think that this really makes sense if you think about the characters that live in this world, because if they all wanted somewhere to kind of get together and somewhere to go where everybody in town would be in the evenings, it would be somebody's really, really nice mansion with all these ballrooms and all of these different rooms, rather than like what you would think of more traditionally as a commercial nightclub. This is like how they used to do it back in the day, if you will. I had a really difficult time with this build specifically, I think because there is a lot going on in terms of theming. I did want it to be Haunted Mansion inspired, but I didn't want it to match the other one, and I wanted there to be ride moments and little ride shout outs, but not ride recreations the way that the other one is, because what's the point in doing both of them if when you get inside they are interiorly so similar that it's not interesting anymore? So it took me a little while to find my footing here and to figure out what I wanted to do, which is why we're kind of jumping right in to the like back ballroom, which is essentially the main room for the nightclub, by the way. But you have all these other rooms. It's a fully functional house. You could turn it into a house and move some characters in here if you wanted to. This is definitely one of those lots that's a little bit more customizable for your gameplay if you want to use it for something else. There is a full dining, full kitchen, I believe 3 or 4 bedrooms upstairs, 2 libraries, a ballroom, a conservatory, and lots of bathrooms. I essentially went into one of the libraries and redid that with mostly Life and Death and some vampires and a little bit of that sanctuary kit, and once I was really happy with how that looked, I took a lot of those elements into some of the other rooms and then splashed in Haunted Mansion stuff. The bus, the head bus, the singing ones that I use repetitively sort of throughout Haunted Mansion type of things, and the brighter wallpapers, the little nods to ghosts and skeletons throughout. There are some touches of magic in here and some little bits for Madame Leota. I believe one of the bedrooms upstairs actually gets turned into a paranormal room that you can use a seance table in, and that's like obviously a feature of the nightclub, a spooky room that you can go and do some magic in. There's also a cupboard downstairs that is filled with all sorts of magical supplies, so if you needed different things, you could possibly come here and pick some stuff up. There is a game that my husband was playing a few months ago, and I think it's called Cabaret. I was so excited about this game, and I started watching him play it over his shoulder. It's essentially a game that you are a vampire and you wake up and you're like you're a nurse or a doctor, but you died right as you became that nurse, or like right after you took the official official test. It does take place in like the Victorian era, and you wake up as a vampire. You were saved to become a vampire because you were so smart and useful, and you have to go around and make decisions and solve problems and also deal with like becoming a vampire. And it's so interesting. I've really got interested in the story of it. He hasn't played it in a little while. I started calling it my show. I was like, you got to play my show because I want to like see what's going on. And that definitely inspired this build a little bit. I thought of like how a lot of the scenes that take place in that game, this isn't spoilers by the way, it's just they get together in like people's mansions and they have little parties, and at the end of every evening there is like a public bar and there is like small town vibes where people kind of congregate in similar areas. But the hot parties, the secret parties, the mystical ones where there's maybe a little bit more vampires and magic and things are going on inside of people's private quarters in these like fancy mansions. So that was very heavily inspirational for the build. And I know that's not Disney, but it is vampires, and I've been trying to put my splashes of vampires into this world, so that's my way of doing it a little bit too. If you were a lover of the villains themed bedrooms that used to exist on the upper floor of this mansion, I would say don't fret, because I did remove them obviously to just do a little bit more generic haunted mansion and vampires theming, but they probably will make some form of a return in a future build. I've always kind of had the idea that possibly with like a hotels pack, but more specifically if I need a filler idea, or when we go to some of the larger worlds like San Myshuno that needs apartments, and there's so many apartments but we don't have as many Disney characters that live in apartments, and so some of those apartments might be decorated a certain way or decorated specifically in Disney theming, but they're not specifically for a character. I could definitely see using those as like doing a villains one and a Disney princesses one, or I have thought of possibly in Granite Falls, and I'm not saying that this is happening for sure because there's so many ideas that I could honestly do with Granite Falls, but just as an example, in Granite Falls I could do a little staycation mini house thing where all of the little houses are themed after a Disney villain or a Disney princess or something like that. So I can see them returning in a refreshed, probably higher quality form in the future. But at the end of the day, I didn't really feel like I could keep them here since I'm taking the Disney villains theming out of this world. And I think it's just going to make more sense to not have it. Now, most of the rest of the video is going to be this nightclub. It's actually called Room for One More now. My husband picked out that name. I liked it. Obviously, a little shout out to the Haunted Mansion itself. And at the end, I'll do a little bit of a revamp on Chernobog. He got his own new medieval castle broken down house at the top of Forgotten Hollow, and if you missed that, it is its own video, so the cutoff here is going to be a little strange because it's just going to be Chernobog and then end of the video. Little bit of something that I've been thinking about in terms of Sims things recently that I just want to like talk about, and I think is kind of equally upsetting and also just, I don't know, these are just my thoughts on something. So you guys know that for a really long time I've been talking about the for rent issue. I'm not putting rentals in the save file, and I've been having a ton of issues with my game since for rent came out, and at one point, probably, I don't know, it could be 6+ months ago at this point, the Sims team came out and acknowledged that For Rent is adding a corruption bug and a corruption problem to the game that they are actively working on trying to fix. So they acknowledged it, which was huge. And if you go back in videos of mine, I will mention that they acknowledged it, and I was so ecstatic that they finally said something about it, because it took almost 2 years for them to say anything about it. But at the end of the day, I would just be grateful for them to fix it. Like, them even saying anything to begin with was huge for me, because I started to get to the point where I was just like, they're never going to do anything about this. It's just the permanent state of the game now. You can put all this work and all this time and build these lovely save files and have these legacy saves and generational saves, and then it just can break one day, and there's no fixing it because of a pack that they put out, that they designed, that they put something into the coding of that is like destroying the game. And it's really been bothering me that we've been getting patches and we've been getting updates to the game, and sometimes emergency patches. Like, a couple of little things have come out with new packs and they put out like an emergency patch because it breaks the game so bad that they have to do something like immediately. And every single time they put out, whether it's the like every 2 or 3 month patch or a pre-game patch, I read the patch notes and I expect them to say something about updating and fixing this problem. After they acknowledged it, I expected there to be news or updates or literally anything. And every single patch that they put out, they say nothing about it, and they don't tell us just an update, anything. Any kind of news, we are still actively working on it. We are still actively investigating it. We haven't solved the problem. We kind of know what the problem is, like any kind of information that they can give us. Because at this point, they said something and now it's been like 6 months, and you have to wonder if they're going to do anything about it because they're just not acknowledging it. And then when they tweet about it, all these comments under the tweets are like, are you going to do anything about the for rent corruption? Are you going to take for rent off of the market? Are you going to acknowledge this publicly and like possibly, I don't know, give people their money back, like make it more of a big deal? And I'm not a fool, okay? I know they're not going to return anybody's money, but it would be so much nicer to just have some level of communication from them in terms of where they're at with it. Is it still being looked at? Because the more that they don't say anything, the more I'm like, they can't fix this problem. Whatever is wrong is deeply rootedly broken in the game. And to add to that, I saw somebody say, and I don't know where they got this information from, so this is just a random tweet, random person, so take this with a grain of salt, but I saw somebody say that the issue is not because of for rent, but because the game itself has a limit to how big your save file sizes can be physically. And once you start to reach that limit, you basically enter like a culling state where the game is going to like delete things and try to get rid of assets and whatever that may be. But the problem with that is that the Sims keeps releasing packs and they keep putting out expansions with all these worlds and all these characters. And so you could essentially start a brand new game with all the packs installed and reach almost to the limit of what this limit could possibly be for save files without even knowing it. And if that is the case, then I feel as though The Sims needs to tell us that so that people can start making decisions about whether or not they do want to continue purchasing all of the packs for this game. Because if it's going to get to a state where you can't really like customize a whole lot of it without things starting to delete themselves or getting the endless loading screen or a little bit of corruption because you have all the packs installed and so your save file by nature is already too large, I feel as though we need to be told that. I feel like that is only fair because then when a pack comes out, I need to start making decisions about whether or not I need to have that pack rather than buying everything. And obviously they do not want to tell us that because if this is true, because I'm not saying that it is true, but just kind of my thoughts behind the whole thing. They don't want to tell us that because they want people to continue buying packs and not be picky about it. And it would cause people to maybe not purchase new expansions and all that. So I don't know. I've just been thinking a lot about this recently. It's really frustrating. Even when I start brand new save files that I have not touched, I have not built in, I don't really use mods. I do use Tool occasionally, but even when I don't use Tool, I have experienced the endless loading glitch, which is the like for rent corruption. And I am literally like candidate number 0, or what is it called? Like I am the first infected. Like I remember back when the for rent patch came out and it broke my game so horribly that I thought my computer was broken. I reset and factory restored my entire PC thinking that my PC was just fried for some reason. And it was, turns out, just the game. The game itself had done that after one little patch. And you would think, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on the whole thing. If you're experiencing it, let me know. A lot of times people tell me they don't have any issues, but I would just say that I think I build a larger scale. And I think I have a lot going on and I have a lot of details and I do have a larger save file. So this really, really does affect people like me and affect the project that I'm working on here. And at the end of the day, I need to know if I should continue in the way that I am currently doing the Disney save. And that's one of the reasons why this ultimately ends up on my mind a lot. But we are actually reaching the end of the video today, finishing off with Mr. Chernobog that finally got his horns from the fairies update. There's been some head accessories that were added, which is really, really cool. And I do want to see more of from the Sims team is like the layering accessory options. And they are obviously not perfect versions of his horns, but they will do, definitely. It's considering I don't use custom content. That is the end of today's very long Forgotten Hollow revamp renovation video. I hope you guys enjoyed everything and let me know what you thought of all the changes down below. You can expect to see a world tour coming up very soon. If you would like to support the Disney Save on Patreon, you can do so by clicking the link in my description box down below or the one at the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching today and I will talk to you all in the next one.